Hey friends, Ben here with Business for Unicorns, and I'm taking over the podcast again from Michael. Today, me and Pete are here to talk about one of the most challenging things when it comes to running a gym, and that's managing underperforming employees. What do you do? How do you handle it? And what are the next steps to get them back on track? So, we've got some great tips for you today that you'll be able to immediately apply if the situation applies to you. Enjoy. Hey friends, Ben here with Business for Unicorns, and today Pete and I are going to talk about managing underperforming employees and all the nuance that goes into that. But before we dive in, I want to give you a friendly reminder about our email list. If you're not on our email list, you get emails from Pete, who you're about to speak to now, as well as Fisher, sometimes from yours truly, sometimes from Michael. But we're putting out regular content that is incredibly actionable in your business, including a recap of related resources, things to help you in your business. So if you're not on our email list now and you're looking for a little bit more of the business of fitness in your inbox, click the show notes, join our inbox, plus we'll give you some free stuff. So let's dive in. Welcome, Pete.
Thank you for having me, Ben.
Yeah, so we want to talk about managing underperforming employees, which is, not something that I guess any of us got into business. I didn't start a gym because I wanted to manage employees, let alone manage underperforming employees. And you've been in business for longer than me, so why don't you kick us off, in broad strokes, what do you think about when you have an underperforming employee that maybe you inherited, maybe you just haven't managed appropriately? How do you handle that?
Oh, well, to your point, to start, I think that pretty much everybody in our audience is going to resonate with your statement that you didn't get into this to manage underperformers or overperformers, to be honest, like the overachievers. I got into this because I was avoiding reality, but I definitely did not get into this thinking that I was going to be a one-man HR team. So the bulk of the fires I've had to put out, the headaches I've had to address over the years have been relating to team management. And it's a reality that we need to come to terms with sooner rather than later, even if it's not like our sweet spot or our zone of genius. And my experience initially was that I kind of built my own underperformers, if that makes sense. Yeah. We did just come out of a retreat weekend in Boston where I gave a lecture on this very topic, and I talked about kind of the design and execution of performance improvement plans. But one of the big kind of recurring takeaways that I found myself saying on multiple occasions during this lecture was, this is probably your fault, first and foremost. And early on, any underperformers we had were people that I hired, I theoretically managed, but the reality is I probably trended a little bit too close to buddies and not manager or employer over the years. And I let a lot of things slide that I really shouldn't have. So this is a mea culpa saying, first and foremost, most of us small business owners who have underperforming coaches, definitely if we hired them ourselves, are the ones that need to be accountable to that, because the first person that should be pointed at in this case is the owner of the operation. You might disagree, but that's my experience.
Oh, and that's a really valuable point. And that was one of my biggest takeaways from your talk in Boston about this, which was, when we're talking to Unicorn Society members or, friends who have other businesses, even if they're gyms or not gyms, it's like, oh, I've got this employee who's doing that stuff. And yeah, there's times where a rock star employee can plummet and become very frustrating, but that's usually a lot more rare than, did you make a bad hire, do kind of phone it in where you're onboarding, or not really continue their development? And sometimes we do just have to look in the mirror to be like, shit, that is on me. And I think that can be really empowering, because then that puts you back in the driver's seat rather than this person is doing that thing. It's actually, where did I misstep that I could course correct and see if this is salvageable?
Yep. Yeah, it wasn't until I got really thoroughly involved with Unicorn Society and working alongside Mark and Michael a couple of years ago that the importance of weekly meetings was just absolutely hammered home with me. And so we had a weekly in-service, which was definitely a good excuse to get together and learn. But we treated that as maybe a handful of minutes of housekeeping, but not true management or leadership. It was more like, hey, we got a holiday weekend coming up. What do we want the hours to be? Who's going to be available over Thanksgiving this week to coach, or this month to coach? That sort of a thing. and there was very little discussion about performance of individuals, and that stuff fell by the wayside for a long time. But once I realized how much easier it was to manage output and a to-do list as I'd say a participant of the BFU team, and how Michael was gently keeping me on track with our weekly one-on-ones where we'd get together and chat for a handful of minutes before we recorded a podcast every week. And in hindsight, I see that Michael was meeting with me weekly, not to say, what are we talking about today on the podcast, but to say, where are we at on this small handful of initiatives before I hit the record button. And it was like I got tricked into being managed, and it was great. So now I know, thankfully, that
Tricked into being managed.
exactly. Well, Ben, you and I both know that the longer you own your own gym, the more you become unemployable. Like the fact that I am a functioning member of this team, this being Business Unicorns, kind of blows my mind, because there was a period of time where I thought to myself, I can't even fathom reporting to anyone after going from college to working a handful of years in corporate, realizing how much I hated being in a cubicle and kind of the red tape associated with working in a publicly traded company, then getting into self-employment. I just rendered myself unemployable in my mind. But I'm backtracking a little bit on that firm standing kind of mindset, with the more I realize how effectively I can contribute and participate when there are guardrails and like just a basic meeting structure and consistent FaceTime. I think maybe, just maybe, we are all employable with the exception of like Elon Musk and Mr. Trump. But otherwise, I think that many of the people who think that they couldn't work for anyone after being self-employed probably could if they got into an organization that had a really good meeting cadence and wouldn't bend on that. They didn't cancel things just because it was convenient. That's a real game changer, and it renders all performance improvement plans effectively obsolete if somebody really just follows those guidelines, because
Yeah.
you manage performance weekly in small but manageable chunks, and it never feels like an overwhelming lift to get somebody course corrected.
100%. I imagine, listeners, if you're listening to this and there's someone on your team or someone that you know, and you're like, oh, that person is just, grinding my gears for whatever reason, I'd encourage you to question, like, when's the last time I had a regular meeting cadence with that person? I'd be very surprised if it was you're currently doing it weekly. I mean, I guess as the exception of your meeting weekly, but like there's no candor and no honesty. Because I'm with you completely. I've been converted to the meeting cadence. I used to try to avoid them like the plague, and now like a really well run meeting is it's one of the most productive times I have. Me and my wife even do a weekly meeting now because our schedules are so different. Um, you'd actually be happy to hear about this too. And my son decided to join our weekly meeting last night. It's Wednesday evenings, most Wednesday evenings, and he came in with a pitch for how he can get a recurring allowance because he has things he wants to buy that now that he's almost 13. Now, obviously, I'm not saying you should meet with your family. Like I'm aware I'm a little bit weird with that. But the point is having that regular meeting cadence when there's actual candor and there's guardrails, to your point, with an agenda. You can almost like trick your staff into being managed, so then you're not letting all the little things compound where you're like steam's coming out of your ears and they might not even know they're screwing up.
Yeah, and Ben, I think that you think it's kind of it's going to be outlandish to people to hear that you have a meeting internally in your family. But one, I feel like I could really use that right now. I just got my first ever club sports parent email because I finally caved, and my son Colin he got to a point where we realized basketball's his thing, and he requested that he could try out for a team, and he did. And I just got the email on Thursday prior to a weekend telling me about the anywhere from 3 to 5 basketball games that are going to happen between 4 p.m. on Saturday and 5 p.m. on Sunday. Potentially
Oh,
5 games in a 25-hour window. Okay. We don't need to get into the merit of that and like whether that's in the best interest of athletes at their age. Sidebar, it's not. But what I do find myself thinking is, if this continues, Katie and I need a meeting. A shared calendar isn't going to be enough. It's going to be a discussion. how are we getting these people to these places at these times? I just don't even understand how it's going to happen. How do we stay on the same page? So I'm on like a freight train speeding toward the weekly meeting you're talking about, and it will be normalized in my house as well. Um, but I
I'll send you my
digress.
agenda.
I want to give it a, as Kayla would say, I want to plus one your idea of the weekly meeting because of how much I think it will help the way you show up to work as well. Because organization at home only serves to bring you to work with a clear head. And I mean, I'm personally just, I can't work at a cluttered desk, just like I can't work or bounce between home and work with a cluttered calendar, a disorganized game plan. So you think it might sound crazy? I don't at all. I think any family with kids who are growing up and playing sports and managing academic calendars could really benefit from a little baseline structure like you're talking about. And if you got an entrepreneur in your family like you do, I say lean the hell into that. I want that kid giving a lecture at our retreat in Toronto next in Q1 because that's a cool angle to me. Any kid at his age who wants to come out and make a compelling pitch to his parents can lecture at our sales conference.
Hey, Liam just earned $50 a month from a 5-minute pitch. He did well.
Yep, nicely done. Well,
Hey
let's
there,
talk
Business
about
Unicorns podcast listeners. If you haven't had a chance yet to leave us a rating and a review on wherever platform you listen to this podcast, it would be so awesome if you take just a quick second to do that. And here's why. Number one, by leaving us a rating and review, you'll allow our podcast audience to grow so more gym owners can build a life and a gym they love. And number two, by leaving us feedback, you'll help us shape the future of the podcast so we know what you like, we know what you don't like, and we know what types of content is resonating and what else should we create for you. Thank you so much for your consideration. And now back to the show.
nicely done. Well, let's talk about off air. We discussed actually getting into managing underperformers, which is a topic that's worthy of our time and energy, I think.
100%. So, quick recap: if you're having underperformed people, whether you inherited them, meaning you're a manager listening to this and the owner hired you and you have to deal with the employees that may or may not be the best hire, or you hired them and aren't doing the best possible job managing them, step one is take a look in the mirror, usually, or I guess if you inherited them, it might be talk to your boss about it. But then step two is make sure you've got that regular meeting cadence with a good agenda and lots of candor. So let's say that you've got the underperformer in place, you're recognizing that it's your fault, you are putting the meeting in place, but we know that a meeting on Monday isn't going to change the performance on Tuesday if it's been a 3 to 6 months of this happening. What do you see as the next step when you're dealing with this, Pete?
Step number one, admit it's your fault. Get that out of the way right out of the gate. And step number two, begin the process of designing a at least loosely structured plan to get them from today to productivity. And in all of the kind of studying I did and listening to podcasts and reading up on this and speaking with my wife who lives in this world in corporate, I consistently found myself seeing performance improvement plan design as being completely aligned with the way we look at our quarterly planning and the way that we design big rock goals for a quarter or for a year and smartifying them, making them as our, I would imagine many of our listeners know, what is it? Specific, measurable. I always lose this.
Attainable.
Yeah. What's that?
Specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, timely.
Boom. There you go. That's why you run our quarterly planning and not me. But the point is, they need to be fair. They need to be reasonable within the time frame that you're outlining. And what I saw time and again was that performance improvement plans weren't designed in any capacity in this corporate world to improve people's performance. They were being weaponized as ways to give managers and executives excuses to offload underperforming employees without concerns about litigation. And so they could just say, this was the plan. You signed on the dotted line at the start that we both acknowledged we understood the plan. You didn't get it done. Kick rocks. And that is, well, one, disheartening, and two, the absolute opposite of improving performance. And so my favorite takeaway from all of this was don't tell someone you're there to help them improve if you have no intention of doing so. You got to rip the Band-Aid off and deal with the consequences of terminating an employee, even if that means that you're paying some unemployment. The reality is you're better off doing that, because all of the underperforming employees' colleagues are watching you and watching how you handle yourself. And they may agree with you that somebody is not pulling their share of the weight, but they are also going to agree with that person if that person points out how you're handling yourself and it's shitty. And they're going to say, you know what, am I one slip up away from that treatment, that protocol, that approach to quote unquote management or performance improvement, when in reality it's just the beginning of the end. Because in corporate, I really learned that it was presumed to be the beginning of the end. It is effectively a scarlet letter against your name internally within the organization until the end of time. It's you basically, where you are at that moment is your ceiling. There's no opportunity for growth or consideration for promotions as you work through the protocol associated with that. And so I read as much about prompt exit packages as I did about performance improvement plans, which is code for how about we just give you some money and you walk away on your own terms, sign this resignation letter, and I'll pay you for a month or 2 months of work. See ya. And we can't do that in this small business setting. We don't have those budgets. We don't have those legal teams. We need to actually fix people's performance or cut and run.
Well, and that was a really valuable point what we're making just now, and again in Boston, that it was like, if your plan is to just fire the person anyways, just fire the person anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Because I guess I'm thinking kind of a little outside the box here. If in a large corporate company, there's more people, so it can be slower for culture to permeate. So if in a large company that culture is still, everybody knows, oh shit, that's your performance improvement letter, you're on the way out, that's your scarlet letter. Imagine how fast that is going to happen in a gym that's got like 4 total team members, including the boss. One person getting that treatment is like we talk about marbles in the trust jar. The jar is shattered. You don't want your team walking on eggshells around you. Versus the flip side of that is, aside from just be a good human and don't lie to people, is, wow, I've got a boss who I was struggling due to whatever reason, and they lifted me up and gave me the skills to do it. Or the team member watching the other employee be lifted up, that they know, like, hey, if I screw up here, like, I know my boss has got my back. That's the culture where people like, yeah, I'll take that shift. I'll happy to stay late. Let me take care of that thing for you. Hey, you seem busy, but I'll take, like, that's a really healthy culture that's going to lead into exceptional service for your clients, members, athletes, which is going to be more referrals, more sales, more retention. Like that, there's a really big downstream effect of that.
You're so right. The downstream piece. It's just amazing how fast word travels in this little bubble of an industry that we're in, and the karma associated with how you handle this stuff is real, and the long term consequences of not doing a good job with managing an underperformer or facilitating their departure from your organization in a tasteful and respectful way, it'll come back and it'll kick you in the teeth real hard if you're not careful, because everybody talks, and it's really easy to do what I've heard called backdoor reference checks in this day and age. And if I were looking for work right now and I was considering a new operation, I would find a way to talk to every employee I could find through social media just to get a feel for their job satisfaction. And if I could figure out who was working there 6 months ago that isn't today, I'd do everything I could to get on the phone with them as well. And it's not that hard to pull that off. And so you can't skate by with being an asshole to an underperformer just because you're over it and you'd rather focus on the good people.
Well, to kind of parse this out into an actionable step, like, admit that it's your fault. You need to own it. Set a regular meeting cadence to address those things, and kind of reading between the lines here, like you said, it's write down a list of the things that need to happen. You may want to get them to sign it and agree to it. Like, disclaimer, we are not the lawyers, but you're going to create a plan with somebody to actually improve their performance. And then you're going to, just like the title of this podcast, managing under performing employees, we're then going to manage them. You'll give them feedback in the sense of coaching on the things they need, or evaluations on the standards they won't be hitting. But like the words that come to mind are, you're the wind in their sails to help make this happen. Yes, they still have to go through with it, but you're setting them up for a game that they can win.
Yeah, when they get the heads up that they're on a plan of sorts, they feel like they're on an island. And one of the first steps you can take toward winning for both parties is actually being a resource. So, not just dumping the to do list and outlining the KPI that you'll be tracking to quantify success, but actually showing up and saying, this is going to be a grind. And I'm here. I'm going to check in with you in the next 2 days, 3 days. Next Monday, we're meeting, and I really want to hear how it's going. And by all means, you pop your head into my office if you need more resources or if you feel like we have not set you up for success on this one. And that just will go so far. And the last thing I'd say is don't forget that you're not going to be able to hide this. Like managing an underperforming employee is just usually in our circumstance, an operation as small as ours, it's already on the radar of their colleagues. They're really hoping and praying that you're going to actually get off your butt and do something about it. And so I wouldn't try and run from it or keep it super secret. If they choose to discuss it with their peers, don't be afraid to talk about it with their peers, and encourage. Maybe one side tip that I did not give during the lecture is if there is empathy on the team or people who are friends with someone who's not performing well, encourage accountability partnership from their peers. Maybe say to them like, hey, I noticed so and so is really a resource for you, or you train together, or you really enjoy each other's company. If you're comfortable with it, I'm going to encourage them to be a resource to you during this process. It's almost like the HIPAA request. Like, can I bring them on the inside track of what we're working on here? Because let's be honest, they know that you're struggling and that we all need to step it up here a little bit. Can I kind of request that they participate a little bit indirectly with the process, and you have someone else who's an ear or a shoulder to lean on as we run through it, and just remind them that you're part of a team.
Yeah, and it's not just to add to that, like plus a million to what you said. It's reminding them they're part of a team, but you're also reminding them through your behaviors. You're not just saying, hey, we got your back, we're a team, let me know if you need anything, and you fade into obscurity. It's, hey, we're part of a team, and here's what that looks like. I'm going to check in with you. I'm here if you need me. Let's get this other person involved. Like, you're creating scaffolding for them to succeed.
Beautiful. All right, let's kill it right there.
That sounds great. Well, thanks for your time, Pete. This is I know it's a kind of like scary and onerous topic, and it feels really doable from what we talked about today.
I hope so. And we are always available via email for people who have follow-up questions if they want to harass us with insight or further inquiries. So Pete or Ben at businessforunicorns.com. Ping us.
Please. Well, thanks for your time, Pete.
We'll talk soon. See ya.